Welcome to another episode of Agentic AI, the future of intelligent systems. For years, the conversation around sovereignty has been straightforward. It's centered on a simple question: where should our data live? Organizations invested heavily in ensuring data stayed within geographic and regulatory boundaries. Architectures were designed around this idea. Data was stored regionally, access was tightly controlled, movement was monitored, and compliance became a function of location. That model worked because the systems themselves were predictable. They waited for instructions, they processed inputs, they produced outputs within clearly defined limits. But something fundamental is changing. The shift is not just about more data or more powerful models, it is about behavior. We are moving from systems that respond to systems that act. And the moment systems begin to act autonomously, the idea of sovereignty starts to change. Agentic AI represents this shift in its purest form. These are not systems that simply generate outputs, they pursue goals, they break problems into steps, invoke tools, and iterate until an objective is achieved. In doing so, they introduce something new: autonomy in execution. And once autonomy enters the picture, sovereignty is no longer a static control problem. It becomes a dynamic governance challenge. Because now the question is no longer just where data resides, it is where intelligence is allowed to act. This is where the traditional model begins to fall short. That model assumes stability. It assumes that data has a known location, that processing happens in predictable environments, and that decisions are made within controlled systems. But agentic systems don't operate that way. An agent might start with a simple task, say generating a report. But to complete that task, it could pull customer conversations from one system, retrieve operational metrics from another, reference historical context from memory, and produce a synthesized output that gets shared across teams. At no point does it explicitly move raw data in the traditional sense, but something more subtle and more powerful happens. The system creates a summary, and that summary is not just compressed data, it is interpreted data. It reflects patterns, insights, and relationships that didn't exist in a single place before. Think about a customer support system analyzing conversations across regions. The raw data stays where it is, but the agent produces a global sentiment summary highlighting dissatisfaction, trends, and recurring issues. Or a financial assistant generating a spending overview. Transactions remain local, but the insights, vendor dependencies, cost structures, investment patterns travel beyond those boundaries. Even in healthcare, an agent might analyze patient records within a region and produce trend summaries that reveal risks or emerging conditions. In all these cases, nothing technically moved, yet something valuable and potentially sensitive was created and shared. So the question becomes unavoidable. If the data never left, but the insight did, what exactly are we governing? This is where sovereignty begins to fragment. In earlier systems, sovereignty was aligned. Data, compute, and decision making all existed within the same boundary. In agentic systems, that alignment disappears. Now you have multiple layers: the origin of the data, where it is collected and governed, the intelligence layer, where models interpret it, the execution layer, where actions are carried out, often across systems, and then memory, where agents store what they learn over time. These layers don't sit in one place, and they are often governed by different rules. What used to be a single boundary has now become a distributed system of boundaries. And within that system, a new kind of risk begins to emerge. Not failure, not explicit misuse, but drift. Autonomous drift happens when systems, in their pursuit of goals, begin to extend beyond their intended scope. An agent designed to generate insights might start combining data sets that were never meant to intersect. A workflow optimization agent might chain actions across systems without fully understanding jurisdictional implications. A reporting agent might refine summaries over time using memory, gradually building a knowledge base that becomes difficult to trace back to its origins. This is not a bug, it is a natural outcome of optimization. Agents are designed to complete tasks efficiently. They are not inherently aware of boundaries unless those boundaries are designed into how they operate. And without that awareness, systems can slowly move from compliant to ambiguous without any clear moment where something breaks. So, how do we respond to this shift? We need to rethink sovereignty itself, not as a property of data, but as a property of decisions. This is where a new idea begins to take shape: decision sovereignty. Decision sovereignty is about controlling how, where, and under what constraints decisions are made and executed by autonomous systems. It shifts the focus from location to behavior, from storage controls to execution controls, from compliance after the fact to governance by design. Because in an agentic system, it is the decision, not just the data, that creates impact. And if decisions are what matter, then sovereignty must be embedded directly into how systems are designed. It is no longer enough to restrict data movement. We need to define what an agent is allowed to do with that data. Every tool an agent can invoke, every API it can call, every data set it can access, these are no longer just technical components. They are governance boundaries. Integrations become control points. Visibility also needs to evolve. It is no longer sufficient to know who accessed which data set. We need to understand the chain of reasoning, why a decision was made, what data contributed to it, and how it was executed. And policies can no longer sit outside the system. They need to become part of the system's reasoning itself, shaping behavior in real time. As organizations move forward with agentic AI, a clear divide will begin to emerge. Some will focus purely on capability, building systems that are faster, more autonomous, more powerful. Others will focus on controlled autonomy, systems that understand boundaries, constraints, and responsibilities. At first, the difference may not be obvious, but over time, it will determine which systems are trusted, which are scalable, and which can operate in a regulated global environment. And this is where the conversation shifts beyond technology. This becomes a leadership question. Because deploying autonomous systems without redefining sovereignty is essentially introducing decision making entities without clearly defined limits. Leaders need to start asking different questions. Where are our systems allowed to act? What decisions can they make independently? How do we ensure those decisions stay within acceptable boundaries? These are not future concerns. They are already shaping how intelligent systems are being built and deployed today. For a long time, we asked where our data should live, but the next decade will be defined by something else entirely. Where is our intelligence allowed to act and under whose control? Because in a world of autonomous systems, sovereignty is no longer about data boundaries, it is about decision boundaries. And those who understand this shift early will not just build more advanced AI systems, they will build systems that are trusted, scalable, and truly sovereign. Until next time, keep rethinking what intelligent systems should be.